Greetings. We appreciate everybody attending our webinar. This is Mark Johnson, Associate Director of Environmental Programs for the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. Today we're going to have a webinar on the components of a BMP guide presented by J. Brian Unruh. Dr. Unruh is from the University of Florida, and he and his team have worked on the BMP planning guide and template for the Golf Course Superintendents Association of America. This is the component of the planning guide, the heart of the BMP, the sections. Dr. Unruh will share the objectives of today's webinar and help guide you through the 12 steps of the process. We appreciate it. We'd like to introduce Dr. Unruh for today's webinar.
All right, thank you, Mark. I appreciate the opportunity to kind of share the next component of this rollout of the GCSAA BMP planning guide and template. Just a little bit of background, just so people know who's talking. There's my picture. I've had the opportunity of working with the GCSAA team to develop the content that kind of is behind what I refer to as the magic curtain, and a web portal that is just a phenomenal tool to assist you, the golf course superintendent, the steering committees, to develop these BMPs, state-centric golf BMPs. And so I think one of the questions that we need to answer first is why should golf course BMPs be developed? And it's BMPs, not just in the golf sector, but really in all sectors of ag and natural resources. BMPs are viewed as really one of the major tools for really driving water quality improvement. And so the term BMP is really codified in a lot of language, regulatory language, and it is what we refer to as a shared language, because it is recognized by your regulatory agencies, it's recognized by conservationists and engineers, and anybody and everybody that is really focused on these water issues. And so BMPs really are about driving improvements. And because BMPs are recognized in federal and state TMDL policy, TMDL meaning total maximum daily load, which is just basically kind of a pollution budget that is used to assess water quality. Because BMPs are recognized in policy for driving these improvement plans, and it is essential that the golf course industry be very proactive in developing and implementing these BMPs related to turf management. That said, the goal of GCSAA is for all 50 states to have BMPs developed by the year 2020. That is a fairly daunting task if each state were to go out there on their own without the support that has been put together by through GCSAA in developing this web tool and the planning guides in partnership with the USGA and Environmental Institute for Golf, as well as even some support from the PGA. And so I'm not the lone man in the show. I actually work with a team of scientists from the University of Florida that have worked to develop the content that resides behind the tool. And so these are my colleagues from the University of Florida that were very instrumental in really bringing this to the forefront. And so this is the cover of the print edition. And so the planning guide and the template really allow for each of the states to move forward, to advance, to develop the BMPs. One of the goals, and for example, here in the state of Florida, when we developed our BMP, we really started that process probably back in the early 2000s, 2002. And it took about 5 years to bring that document to a published point. With the GCSAA BMP planning guide and template, those years really can be distilled down into months because the way the tool is made, the content will be right there, literally at your fingertips. And so when we jump into this, this is from the gcsaa.org/BMP website. You can learn a lot about all of this out there, but I want to make sure that if you're watching this webinar and you have not registered for the for access to the BMP, then you need to go and do that. Let me also reiterate here that this is really more for the state groups, the planning team, the steering committee that is tasked with putting together a BMP for a particular state. At the present time, this is not really for the facility level. So if you're just a golf course superintendent and you're very interested in this and adopting BMPs for your particular facility, I would say stay tuned. That is really the next phase of this, but the primary goal at the present time is for these 50 state BMP to be developed. And so, what are the logistics in developing a state BMP? First, there was step one, that's the steering committee. We conducted a webinar that is available on the GCSAA website that really gets into kind of the nuts and the bolts of putting together a BMP and focuses on the logistics and the composition of the steering committee. And so that webinar is available. And for the remainder of this webinar today, we'll focus really on using kind of the BMP template, and so the step 2 of the overall process. And so there are a dozen BMP categories that reside within the template, and things from planning, design, and construction, irrigation, pollinator protection, maintenance operations, so on and so forth. And so I'm going to unpack each of these 12 categories here in today's webinar. And so I think it's important to kind of define what you will see in the template. Under each of these categories, you're going to see really kind of a couple terms. You're going to see the principles, and then you will see the actual BMPs themselves. I think it's important to define principles. Just go to a dictionary and you'll see, a principle is a basic truth, a law or an assumption. It's the ultimate source or the origin or the cause of something. And so principles, you will notice in each of these sections really are driving this. And so here's a screenshot of the web tool, and you can see in this particular case we're on the water side and talking about drought response, and you can see where I've highlighted with the red circle the principles of dealing with turf drought. And so it's the presence of visual symptoms of moisture stress is a simple way to determine when irrigation is needed. Using a soil moisture meter to determine moisture needs of greens and tees. And so those are kind of the principles that drive the BMPs. And so the principles are kind of the as just said, it's the basic premise as to why we need to do the actual BMPs. Now, the best management practices, these are the long lists of bulleted items. I think it's important also to note that BMPs mean different things to different people. And so to some, it simply means, say, for example, a best management practice as opposed to the not so best management practice. But in some states, BMPs can actually signify regulatory influence. And that is very, very key as you start to develop and to populate your individual state's BMP manual. And so, for example, in the state of Florida, we actually have a statute here in Florida that defines by law what a BMP is. So a best management practice means a practice or a combination of practices that are determined by coordinating agencies. And so, for example, in Florida, the coordinating agencies are the Department of Ag and Consumer Services and the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. And so then it has to be based on research, field testing, and expert review. That's where your university, your land-grant university scientists come into play. And so they tend to be out there conducting research, doing the field testing, and then validating these various BMPs. And they have to be the most effective and practicable. In other words, if you were to put a BMP in place that caused you to, for example, have to close half of your golf holes, for example. I'm exaggerating, but that would not be an effective or a practicable BMP. And then they have to be economically and technologically sound. And so if a BMP comes down the line, is promulgated down, and it says that you couldn't fertilize, your golf course in certain months, which is an issue that we wrestle with in the state of Florida. Those aren't really very good BMPs because it would put you out of business. And so in the state of Florida, they cannot, a BMP that would put you out of business would not be a best management practice. And then this last sentence, for improving water quality in ag and urban discharges, that is key. Again, that takes us back to the reason BMPs are being developed in the first place is really to drive water quality improvements. And so you will notice when we go back to the template, again, we're looking at this drought response category or water, you see that this regulatory considerations is highlighted in red. The font is red. Every single category of BMPs you will see this regulatory considerations, and it is highlighted in red just to be an attention-grabbing focus. And so it's important that you really within your individual states you go and really scour the regulatory side of it to make sure that your BMPs will be compliant with state and local regulations. So let's jump into the 12 BMP categories, and I'm just going to highlight each of these 12 to give you kind of an idea as to what is in the portal. And so the first one is planning, design, and construction. And so this is really kind of an overarching look at how the construction phase of a golf course, whether it's brand new construction, building a brand new golf course, or going in and simply doing some bunker alterations or moving tees, for example. Any of those kinds of things will be underneath this this particular category. Realizing that anytime we bring equipment and golf course or bulldozers, earth moving equipment, this is really a point where we have the potential for the greatest risk of really altering the ecosystem. And we know that without proper planning and design that you can have some potential mishaps from an ecosystem perspective. And so it's imperative that proper planning and design be done. And we know, based on research, that when that is done, then we can have minimal impact on the ecosystem. And so facilities should be designed and constructed as well to maximize energy efficiency. You will see the last category of BMPs really will focus on this as well. And so when you see the tool, when you're working it, again, you'll see each of the various categories that are being discussed. Again, there you see the regulatory issues being highlighted in red. And then you'll see some of these principles or these driving things that local and state regulations, for example, may be in place in your location. May is probably questionable. They probably do exist. And so most of the states in the nation have significant regulations when it comes to construction. And so it's very imperative that early engagement among your developers and designers, your community groups, the permitting agencies, whether they're at the state level or at the local level, and even in some cases, if you're near navigable waters, it could be even some federal regulations, that all of these entities and these people are brought to the table in the early stages of that. I'll just highlight one particular category, for example, grow in. And so here's a couple driving principles. Turf grass establishment is a unique phase in turf grass growth, requires greater quantities of water and nutrients, and consequently there is the potential for an elevated level of risk in the grow in. And so it's important to make sure that BMPs are adhered to during this planning, design, and construction phase. One of the things that you may note as you work through the various BMP categories is there is a significant level of redundancy between the various categories. That is intentional. It is not an oversight. Realizing that this tool was designed to be used by all 50 states. And the way the tool is made, I'll point out, you can see the little icons over here, the eyeball and the editor or the trash can symbol. One could start working through this tool. If you were to highlight this this icon of the eye, you can put an X across it and it would hide it. And so you know, one state may be working through this and say, you know, this particular category of BMPs is not necessary for our state, and so they could hide it and inadvertently miss something that maybe pertains to, you know, say pollinators or something. And so there is a level of redundancy in all of this, just to make sure that that nothing gets missed. The next category of BMPs is irrigation, and the purpose of this section really is to identify those practices related to water use, and really coming at from two different perspectives, both the conservation side of things and then a water quality protection side. And so those two overarching principles that are driving this are very important, realizing that water, or the lack of water, is a major issue within the golf course industry, and so we need as an industry to be very keenly aware of all of those measures to conserve the limited resources that we have, and then also to protect those water resources that are there. And so the principles discussed in the irrigation section really are important to understand and apply when we're dealing with water quality and quantity issues in and around natural resources. Because this is such a key component, you will notice that the number of BMP categories under this particular section, it's probably the largest section, and we deal with everything from wellhead protection to sprinkler maintenance to turf drought response, even getting into the pumping side of irrigation. So this particular section is one of the most robust, with lots of BMPs that are there. So it's important for golf course owners to realize that the owners of the facility, whether it's a privately owned or member owned, that the owners are responsible for adhering to federal, state, and local laws as it relates to water and to irrigation. Superintendents, as the stewards of the environment, really have a responsibility to adhere to water quality standard rules regarding both groundwater and surface water that are out there. So that really kind of deals with the irrigation side, but surface water management is also key, and the team of University of Florida faculty that put this together and then was reviewed by a task group that was put together by GCSAA. I believe there were like 17 or 18 members, which included some other universities, scientists, a golf course architect, and then a number of key superintendents from across the country that have been engaged in this BMP process. And so surface water was decided to be dealt with separately. Most of the time when you see the water features on a golf course, we think they're there primarily for an aesthetic purpose, which they clearly do add aesthetics, but it's important to realize that water features on a golf course really are a link in a storm water management chain within an overarching watershed. And so as stormwater enters a golf course area, and then as water as rain and snow melt falls on the golf course, and then realize that water leaves that golf course. And so that whole conveyance of water across the golf course is key, and so it is dealt with separately in this BMP section. When we talk about stormwater capture, these regulatory considerations as well, the aquatic plants, human health concerns, floodplain restoration, all of these topics are taken into consideration underneath this particular section. And so from a best management practices perspective, it's really intended to prolong the detention process as long as practical. So as water comes onto the golf course, we want obviously to be able to capture that water, to harvest it, to put it into those lakes that are then and ponds that are then used for irrigation, and then also realize that then that water will percolate down and then be a significant amount of groundwater recharge. And so the kind of overarching goal is that as water leaves the golf course, whether it's through these streams and rivers moving away or leaves the golf course as in percolating down, is that we want to make sure that water that is leaving the golf course is better than when it arrived on the golf course. And so all of these various practices take that into consideration as well. Stormwater is the conveying force behind non-point source pollution. And so that is one of the reasons this section is very important as well. Non-point source pollution, which is again really what is driving the whole BMP process, that is this non-point source pollution is when pollution caused by humans comes not from a pipe from a factory or a sewage treatment plant, but just simply from daily activity. And so these pollutants that are commonly found in stormwater include things, like fuel, oil from your vehicle that's dropping on the ground, runoff that picks up the stormwater runoff is picking these pollutants up and moving them from one point to another. And so from the golf course perspective, those grass clippings, the fertilizers that we use, the pesticides that we use, all have the potential of being picked up as water is moved across the surface and then deposited off of the facility and impair the water quality. And so those are things that we're trying to minimize through the use of best management practices. So as the irrigation is key and making sure that we're putting the water where we want it, then we monitor that storm water as well. The next category of BMPs really focuses on monitoring and management of the water quality. And so every golf course should have a plan in place to monitor the state of the environment and the effects the golf course may be having on the environment, for better or for worse. And so monitoring is the method that is used to determine if those practices that are kind of outside of the golf course that bringing water on, or the practices that we're actually doing on the golf course, whether they're having a positive or a neutral or a negative effect on water quality. And it really also provides a body of evidence to disprove allegations that a golf course is responsible for environmental changes for which it is not responsible. I was involved in a golf course here in Florida that through a Lake Watch program, the water body adjacent to the golf course, not on the golf course, but adjacent to the golf course, had extremely high levels of phosphorus in the water. And so the golf course superintendent was able to come in and show evidence through his fertilizer practices and his record keeping that he had applied only negligible amounts of phosphorus to that golf course over the last 5 or 6 years. And so we were able to go in and find some water quality monitoring data where that particular water body had been monitored for years, and the phosphorus levels had always been elevated on that particular facility or that particular water body. And so we were able to use the water quality monitoring that had been done in conjunction with the fertilizer application records to clearly demonstrate that the phosphorus sources in that water body that was off of the golf course were not coming from the golf course. And so had that data not existed, had the reporting not existed, that superintendent could have faced some significant consequences. So water quality monitoring, and I just highlight here the sampling program and the BMPs that are there, making sure that really implementing a water quality monitoring program. Do it as kind of to establish some background levels. If construction is taking place, do it during construction, and then also as a long-term management. And so it's important to sample all of the points of entrance and the points of exit where water is coming onto the facility and leaving the facility, so that we can identify those impacts that may be there. And it is strongly recommended as well, the BMP, is to use a certified laboratory. That is key, especially you know, at a point in time where maybe a regulatory agency is going to get involved. If that data, if those water quality assessments are not were not conducted by a certified laboratory, they could be called into question. The next major section for BMPs involves the nutrient management side. Of course, nutrient management plays a key role in reduction of environmental risk, and as we all know, fertilizers can be very expensive. And so nutrients, generally speaking, are the one of the major components of deteriorated water quality. Nitrogen in particular, phosphorus as well. And so those are two that are key and are being watched, and it's due to those nutrients moving into the water and moving off the water that causes these, potentially causes these algal blooms that then can alter ecosystems. And so a goal of proper nutrient management should be able to apply the minimum quantity of nutrients necessary to achieve those acceptable playing standards. And so this particular section of the BMP speaks about the regulatory considerations as well. And it is very key to assess at the state and the local level those regulatory considerations that need to be included. This has been a big deal in the state of Florida. And as of this recording of this webinar, all of our golf courses in the state of Florida have been exempted from some rather prohibitive fertilizer restrictions that have been placed on other aspects of the green industry. And because of the Florida BMP training program and certification program, again, golf has been exempted from all of these particular ordinances that have been put in place across the state of Florida. And so it's important to develop and design nutrient management plans within these regulations that address these local concerns. And so depending on your location, again, these regulatory agencies may include federal, state, and even local policies that are there. And so key involvement. One just piece of advice here in the nutrient management side of things, well, really within all BMPs, is we tend to want to include lots and lots of minute points and lots of details. I think it's important to step back when we think about the BMPs and kind of pull that view up a little bit higher. These are more higher level statements, these best management practices. I strongly discourage putting in lots of details, fertilizer rates, fertilizer timings, those types of things. You want to avoid putting that much detail in these documents and rather link the BMP manual, the BMPs, to your land-grant university extension publications. Here is an example of a publication that literally is hot off the press, as in yesterday. And this particular publication involves nitrogen potassium ratios for Florida golf courses. It is much easier for university scientists to update these types of publications in a timely manner as new research results become available. It's much easier to update the extension publications rather than going and having to update, you know, an entire BMP manual, even if it's an electronic manual. And so avoid putting in specific rates and timings, rather focus more on those higher level principles and statements and then link to the university publications. cultural practices, this particular section of the BMP template is not as robust, realizing that across the country, the 50 states that are there, we manage turf so differently, and so we see just general mowing and cultivation. Those regions of the country where overseeding is conducted, there's BMPs on shade and tree management. So again, this is an area that you can expand. Let me also interject at this point as well that in the BMP template, directly above these lists that are shown, you can add your own categories. And so it is a very flexible tool that allows you to add a particular category that you and the steering committee and the writing team may deem important. IPM is another section with another section of BMPs that are there. The objectives of IPM, of course, are reducing pest management expenses and conserving energy and reducing the risk of pesticide exposure to peoples and animal and even in the environment. And so its main goal really is to reduce pesticide use by really combining a number of tactics for controlling pests, whether it's including those cultural practices or biological or genetical or chemical controls to manipulate the environment in which these pests are living. And so obviously pest management on golf courses results in significant inputs of time and labor and money. The various reports that have come out show that this is a major category of expense for golf courses. And so to grow healthy turf grass, it's really important to know what IPM is and how to implement it for the various pest groups, whether they're insects or nematodes, diseases, and weeds. So in this particular category of BMPs, again, you see the regulatory considerations, again, prominently displayed in the red font, because realizing that most of our states have significant regulations that involve the use of pesticides that regulate the person making the applications, the manufacturers of these products as well. And so again, we as the writing team and the task group that reviewed the development of the BMP template, it would have been an exhausting process for us to go try to identify all of those regulations across all 50 states. And then if we had done that, realize as well that those laws change by the day. And so again, it's very key to go into your individual state, identify those regulatory considerations that are there, make sure they're listed into the BMP template for your specific state. I think, again, let me reiterate, probably a good idea to link to various laws that are there as opposed to simply cutting and pasting the law that is in place at that exact moment, realizing again that laws change and can change very, very quickly. Record keeping of pesticide use is likely required by the laws in your state, and record keeping is a key component of IPM. Knowing what happens, when it happens, and realizing that a lot of times pests tend to recur in the same places at kind of the same times from one year to the next. There are a lot of tools at gcsaa.org. If you look under the resources tab, and in this particular case, the IPM planning guide is a very robust tool that has been updated and revised. And so this is a great place to link within your BMP manual, to link to these various tools and guides that are available. Realizing as well that this is a major initiative of GCSAA, that over the next several years, additional tools are being developed that will allow the superintendent to better comply with the BMPs that are in place. So the IPM side of the equation focuses really on managing the pests. This particular section of BMP focuses more on managing the pesticides that are being used, and realizing that as an overall part of pest management, pesticides are a key point of this, but the selection of those pesticides really can be based on whether they're effective or not, and their toxicity to non-target species, and site characteristics that are present on your particular golf course as well. And so under the BMPs that are there, there's a key number of categories or subcategories there that all relate to how to select a particular pesticide. Let me reiterate, a lot of times we just will pick a pesticide maybe simply by the cost, or simply whether it works or not, and clearly those are key components, but there's really these other categories or these other factors that really should drive our pesticide selection. And so that's like pesticides with minimal impact on non-target species. And so by law, every pesticide label has these prohibitions or these warnings on the label that talk about the impact on non-target species. I think it's very key to realize that, and I use an example of where a lot of our golf courses do a superb job of monitoring wildlife on the golf course, and it's key that if you have noted through pesticide or through wildlife inventories that you have particular species of wildlife, or whether it's mammals or amphibians, if you have noted that those are on the facility and you are using a pesticide that has a clear prohibition against spraying that pesticide in the vicinity of that particular wildlife, then you could find yourself really in a conflict there. And so an example we use here in Florida, Florida has a particular Florida scrub jay. It's a bird, and there are a number of pesticides that are used on golf courses that have prohibitions against using that pesticide near and around the environment in which that particular bird species lives. And so I just point out that caution there, that when we're choosing pesticides, we take all of that into consideration. Pest resistance is a big issue, and so we want to make sure that we choose pesticides that minimize the resistance side of things. And then toxicological risk associated with pesticide exposure, obviously realizing that a golf course is inhabited not just by wildlife but also by golfers. And so making sure that we identify BMPs that would minimize the risk that is there. And then also for example, leaching potentials, environmental fate and transport concerns. All of these things should be taken into consideration when we deal with selecting pesticides that are used on the golf course. Another category of BMPs really relates to pollinator protection. This is obviously a huge issue in the United States right now, realizing that most flowering plants need pollination for their reproduction. And so while some plants are pollinated by wind, many do require the assistance of insects and other animals, and in particular the western honeybee. It's one of the most important pollinators in the United States, and other bee species. And so protecting these bees and other pollinators has really been the focus of agriculture, as well as obviously in golf course management. And so there's kind of two sides to this. Obviously, pesticides are products designed to control pests, and the non-target effect of these pesticides can have a negative impact on pollinator species and their habitat. And so this is an area, as I said, it's under great study right now. A lot of scientists are focusing on this, and there are resources that are being developed right now that will be linked to the GCSAA websites as well. So pollinator protection is a key component of the BMPs as well. Maintenance operations, many of the operations and the practices can generate a significant quantity of pollution ranging from fuel and oil spillage to waste and waste to equipment washing facility wastewater. And so we see here where a piece of equipment is being washed away, and so that wastewater carrying those clippings, which clippings clearly have nutrients in them and could have pesticides on them. The movement of this wastewater off could create some problems, and so there are BMPs on waste handling and equipment washing, fueling facilities, so on and so forth are all included in the maintenance operations section of the BMP template. Non-play areas, there's some BMPs related to these particular areas. Clearly these are an essential part of the overall golf course, the design, the aesthetics that are there, even wildlife habitat. And so there is a section of BMPs that take into consideration these kind of non-play areas and what should be done from a BMP perspective to make sure that those areas as well are being managed in an environmentally sound manner. The 12th category of BMPs really relates to energy. The GCSAA Golf Course Environmental Profile that have been conducted show that really 6 major energy sources are used on a golf course, from electricity, gas, diesel, natural gas, propane, and heating oil. And so, and other operational uses are also segmented to meet the various energy uses across the facility, whether it's in the maintenance facility, the clubhouse, the swimming areas, all of these things. And so an overall conclusion of the study and the profile that was done was that golf course managers need to take steps to identify options for conservation. You can see from this photograph in here that this maintenance facility has embraced the use of solar energy to meet their demands for energy in their maintenance facility. So one of the key components of the energy BMPs really are to really kind of draft conservation position statements. And so how is where the team comes together to identify those key areas on the golf course where we can reduce the impact as it relates to energy consumption. Realizing that, again, there's all the various, whether it's the maintenance facility, up in the clubhouse, the restaurants, all of those different pieces and parts. Energy consumption is a big concern and are addressed in these BMPs. And so here are the various categories that are there. I highlight just energy conservation, realizing as well that we look down through this infrastructure, the irrigation side of things, realizing that a significant amount of energy is used simply to run the irrigation pumps that are there. And so just again developing BMPs or adopting BMPs that can minimize the overall impact of energy use on the golf course. And so we've covered the 12 categories of BMPs. Realize that under each of these, when you click on a particular topic, for example, design and renovation, that there is a whole other layer under there. And again, this is a completely editable BMP template. And so if a particular category or a particular subsection of a BMP does not pertain to your situation in your state, you can simply hide it and it will not show up in the overall plan. So we've discussed the 12 BMP categories and the subcategories there, kind of the premise and the principles that lie behind why those were included. We've talked about the built-in redundancy that was placed there simply to make sure that a particular category is not missed in the population or the populating of the template. Step 3, which will be discussed in more detail in a subsequent webinar, is the technical review. We'll just briefly mention it here, but it is key that once the template has been populated, kind of that lengthy process of bringing it all together is then reviewed. And so really a good approach to really writing the BMP manual and wordsmithing and making sure that everything is in place is to assign writing teams for each of the major sections. So again, we had 12 categories of BMPs. This is where we reach out to fellow superintendents, we reach out to the university extension and research faculty, regulatory agency personnel, those folks who have expertise in those particular areas, or at least an interest in those particular areas, are then brought together to help kind of work through those sections and make sure that the generic language that was included in the template becomes specific language that pertains to the state in which the BMP is being developed. It's also important to extend technical reviews to personnel that are not on the BMP steering committee or those writing teams where maybe specialized expertise is necessary. For example, a golf course architect or an irrigation designer could be some great resource people to review those various sections within the BMP manual as well. Once that process is put into place, there's a stakeholder review process that's put into there. And so here's just an example from that was provided, and where you can see that comments came in. This is pertaining to the New York BMP development process, and so this was just a tool. This was an Excel spreadsheet that was developed where these comments were provided. It shows you who the commenter was, and so example here is Dr. Marty Petrovic from Cornell, and then the response that was given. I think it's important here to note that the BMP document is a consensus document, and so there will be comments that are provided by folks that may not have the expertise necessarily to speak to an issue, or candidly there could be some comments that come in from somebody that maybe has a particular axe to grind. And so again, this is a consensus document, meaning that as the document is reviewed by all these people, a particular comment that is made by somebody may not be the consensus of the entire group, and therefore can be excluded or be culled out. And so again, the stakeholder review process is key as well. There is a very robust forum on the BMPs that are out there, and here's just a screen grab showing this. And so as questions arise under this BMP forum that is being monitored by GCSAA staff and then some of the others that have been actively involved in the BMP development process. And so it's a good place to review some of the discussion that's going as it relates to developing BMPs as well. I point you back to an article that is on the GCSAA BMP website that shows this is the article that was written that came out in the January 2017 issue of Golf Course Management that really digs into the whys of BMPs and then how these have been successfully used across the country as well. And so with that, we reach the end of this section that really outlines what the various categories of BMPs are, and just provides kind of an overarching view of why each of those 12 categories were included. And with that, I will turn it back over to Mark Johnson with GCSAA.
Thank you, Dr. Unruh. It was a very good webinar today. We hope that everybody has taken away a lot of points when you review this webinar. The importance of the work that the team that was done at the University of Florida and the National Planning Guide is important for advocating for the golf industry and the superintendent profession. Please feel free to contact Dr. Unruh at his email there on the slide, or you can contact me, Mark Johnson, Associate Director at GCSA, by mjohnson@gcsa.org. You please be sure to look at the planning guide link section on gcsa.org for the other webinars. If you have any questions, always feel free to contact us. Today we stress the importance of involving your university scientist, your turfgrass scientist, and their expertise as well as others in the development of your BMPs. But we want to help you get it across the finish line, so we're here for you in that aspect as well. Thank you again. Thanks for attending the webinar.